Hi, everyone, and welcome to GLF Live. I'm Gabrielle Lipton, Editor-in-Chief of Landscape News for the Global Landscapes Forum, and we are here on this Friday to discuss a really interesting intersection of disciplines, literary fiction and environmental science. This coming Sunday, as many of you may know, is World Environment Day. So in advance of that, we're going to hear about the environment in one of the parts of the world most affected by global warming and climate change, that being India, as seen from the perspective of a heat health expert. And we're going to glimpse into the environment of the future as conceptualized by a renowned author. And we're going to explore the ways these different approaches to facts and fiction align. It's going to be a really fascinating conversation, and if you have any questions along the way, please drop them in the chat of the platform on which you're listening, and hopefully we'll have time to take a few at the end. But first, I will welcome our speakers. Joining from India is heat health expert Abhiyant Tiwari, who holds a master's in public health from Harvard and now advises Indian governance at multiple levels on heatwave health adaptation plans, as well as serves in numerous other national and international research and advisory positions around the world on this critical topic. And from New York, we have with us Alexandra Kleeman, who recently published a climate fiction novel called Something New Under the Sun, which I can highly recommend. It's a great read. And she's also published multiple other novels, holds bylines in every major publication, is an assistant professor at the city's New School, and was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in Fiction this year. So welcome to both of our speakers. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this special Environment Day GLF Live. And we are going to jump right in here. And I would like to start with hearing a bit from each of you about why you're doing what you're doing. So for you, Abhiyant, this is why you've chosen to focus your career on heat and heat health and global warming and the science behind it. And Alexandra, for you specifically in the capacity of your recent book, why you chose to start tackling climate fiction. So Alexandra, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah. Well, I ever since I was a child, I received the information, the warnings about global warming, which was often um, uh, called global warming rather than climate change in the time. So it was always at the forefront of my mind, but it wasn't always easy for me to figure out what it might look like to address it in fiction, especially because so much of the way I think historically that we've addressed possible problems of the future has been through dystopia and specifically, post-apocalyptic novels, which I used to read as a kid, which often posit this sort of world that's going to be tribal and sort of a buccaneer future. And that just seemed like a very tired direction to me. I think that there are many more avenues open to us than that. And it took me some time to figure out how exactly I wanted to talk about it and how I wanted to address what I saw changing in the environment around me and in the environment of the places that I loved and grew up in. I'm from Colorado, and we see the effects of climate change acutely there in the wildfires that are taking over and in the dryness that is prolonged and sort of unusually historically extended periods of drought. So on the one hand, I want to depict the reality that I see around me because that seems like an important thing to do, not to write into a genre of an artificially stable reality that we no longer live in. But I also think that fiction needs more attention to the environment built into it because we tend to have human figures in the foreground. We talk a lot in creative writing programs about characters, and characters are important, but characters are also in a world that is changing and affecting them. I think of Amitav Ghosh a lot and how he talks about the necessity of making fiction adapt and show the way that people come into intersections with the land around them. So that's me.
Thanks a lot. I really like your point about bringing more attention to environment in fiction. And in the past, I feel like that's been quite a static character in novels. Like environment is what it is. And you make a really good point that the environment is changing so quickly. And so that role the environment plays in literature needs to keep up with that and needs to reflect that. And I think that's a really interesting point. So Abhiyant, we'll move to you now. What brought you into the research and the work and the advising that you're doing now on heat health?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much, Gabrielle. Thank you so much, GLF, for inviting me to this, very interesting event where we have brought in, people like me who work on science and policy, and people like Alexandra, who I really admire. Like, I also look forward to read her latest book. But what brought me to work on heat health? So I personally believe that everyone has to have a personal story or a connection with the work that they do. What is my story with working on heat health? I'll not go into that, but what Alexandra was just mentioning about the early warnings and early warning systems. So and there are a lot of events. Let me just try to connect it with the current events that are going on right now. There are a lot of global events going on right now, including the Stockholm 50, which we may talk about later. But in last week, there was another global event. We all talk about the climate change events, the IPCC events, or the UNFCCC event, but we should also note that there are other events also that happen. So the last week was the UNDRR, UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. They had a global platform for disaster risk reduction, which event happened last week. And one of the agenda that the nations globally working upon is the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which talks about certain priorities in order to address the risk of disasters. And first of that is understanding risk. So I, coming from background of public health science, environmental science, think that this is my responsibility to connect the science with people and policy. Uh, and when we talk about understanding risk, it is very necessary in order to communicate the risk properly and in order to lately govern the risk properly. For example, in India, we live in a country which is a tropical climate, and where most of the parts during summer do experience heat wave events. And it's a general belief that a heat wave is normal, it won't affect us, but that's wrong. That's wrong. It can still impact. It can still affect the health of people, the life of people, the livelihood of people. So so dwelling into diving deep into this knowledge, this information, and bringing out what exactly the policymakers, the people in general should know about from this information and act upon, is what I believe as a professional working in the field of environmental health sciences and public health, as a responsibility of mine. And that is what brought me to work on developing heat health adaptation plans and early warning systems in India, starting from 2013 onwards, when we developed the first heat action plan in the South Asia for the city of Ahmedabad. Yeah.
Thank you, Abhiyant. And it's really admirable that you're working from this deep sense of responsibility, and also to your point of communicating the science and communicating the research that you're doing is just so important in this day and age, and communicating it properly to different audiences, such as policymakers, the general public, etc. So thanks for that bit of background from both of you. Alexandra, your new novel, Something New Under the Sun, is set in a time when climate change does seem worse than it is now. Things like drought and water shortage and fires are just a bit more heightened than they seem to be now in the United States, where your novel is set. But it's a bit hard to tell just how far in the future your novel is. And so I was wondering if you could give us a bit of insight into just kind of how you put this plot together and the research that you did to underpin it, and if it is set 5 or 10 or 15 years in the future, or if it's just generally sometime out there that we're approaching. So yeah, anything you could say on that research process that fed into the plot?
Yeah, I had a big problem presented to me when I thought about how far into the future this book was going to be, because I wanted it to be a near future novel. I think that there's something about people being able to recognize their world in a speculative fiction that makes them related back to themselves, makes them related to their moment. A lot of speculative fictions push far, far into the future to account for all the changes that are going to happen. But I think this also allows us to keep it at something of a safe remove. So I didn't choose a specific number of years in the future, but I wanted to sort of start from a place similar to our own, but push it towards some of these changes that in the climate reporting and early warning systems we know are coming, and try to build them in, and especially to build in the way in which these drastic changes can become psychologically normalized in some sense. We're already experiencing a lot of changes, higher temperatures, blackouts due to people using air conditioning all at once in urban environments, things like that. And it may be a shock the first time we see it, but we'll quickly lose that sense of shock and try to just get ahead and on with life as fast as we can. So fiction is a place, I think, where you can slow down that process of getting on with it, make people look more clearly at it. And sometimes having these features that are not thought of as part of our time, having them stick out draws the reader's attention to them and makes them think continually about it, even in the context of more ordinary events. I really wanted to think about this feeling that you have now more than we used to, where our daily life is unsettled by disaster. I'm talking about when there's a fire burning someplace and the road you used to get home closes and you have to drive a long way around. All of these different adaptations and longer paths that we take in the face of disaster. So I built in those disruptions based on little bits that I've experienced in the past. However, by the time I was editing the book, I was actually back in Colorado, and we were experiencing wildfire season like none we've ever experienced before. 3 of the largest wildfires in Colorado history were burning that summer. And it was this eerie feeling when I was going over my manuscript and thinking, well, I imagined this to be near future, but actually the present is more extreme than what I had imagined. So I'm going to have to push it even further in that direction. And understand, that some of these effects are not as far off into the future as I imagined they were.
That's a really terrifying realization to have, that when you think you're writing something fiction and something that we're expecting and waiting for, but that it's actually happening now. That's quite a staggering realization. And I think to your point about the psychological normalization of climate change, I was just linking that in my mind to COVID and how quickly some of the adaptations we made for the pandemic just became completely normalized. And it's tricky how quickly we can normalize things that are disasters and are major risks. So it's great that you're addressing that in your work. Abhiyant, kind of to Alexandra's point about how the wildfires were the worst they've ever been, in India, the heat wave that the subcontinent just experienced was record-breaking, and it hit 50 degrees Celsius in some areas. And these heat waves are set to become far more normalized and hit the subcontinent far more often than they have in the past. Could you tell us a bit how people are adapting, how people are going to handle this?
Yeah, so you're right. This wasn't a normal summer for us. In fact, this was one of the hottest summer that we had in our history. In fact, our month of March was the hottest March month in the past history of 122 years, which is when the India Meteorology Department started recording the weather observations back in 1901. So yes, it was very hot. We almost had more than 280 heat wave events throughout this summer in almost more than 16 states in India. And in fact, the recent reports from the scientific community, including the one from the World Weather Attribution Organization, stated that because of climate change, this event, which would otherwise have happened in once in a 3,000 years, would happen now in every 100 years. So the possibility of such severe, intense event happening has definitely increased in India and Pakistan by 30 times. How people will handle this, or how people are handling this? See, while there is no doubt that we need to work on mitigations, strategies in order to, it is important to work on mitigation, to limit the future global warming, limit it up to 1.5 degrees Celsius, which we thought we should do in COP21 during Paris, that we should restrict by the end of this century. But the latest IPCC reports also suggest that we might, reach or even exceed that warming by 2030, by end of this decade itself, in all possible emission scenarios, and it could go even worse in the scenarios with the highest emission levels. But so to restrict that 1.5 degree Celsius warming, we definitely need to work on the mitigation policies, mitigation measures, long-term measures. But what we are facing right now is already the consequences of 1.1 degree Celsius warming that we have already made in our global average temperature, which we cannot avoid now. So what is the point? I mean, what are the solutions that we have now is to adapt. And heat health action plans are one of such, examples of adaptation that people, that the cities and the governments are implementing in order to address the issue of extreme heat. So adaptation is the priority, no doubt on that. We must plan, we must implement our heat health adaptation plans, and we must invest in our adaptation plans, because still the financing in the adaptation is far behind what has been committed on all the global and regional climate summits. So definitely, to manage the unavoidable, we need to adapt what we are facing right now, and to avoid the unmanageable that will happen in future, we need to mitigate and ensure our mitigation policies are on track. But yes, heat health action plans are working in reducing mortalities. We have seen examples from our own country, from India, for example, in Ahmedabad, after implementation of Ahmedabad heat action plan, the average mortality during the summers has gone down as compared to the summers prior to the implementation of adaptation plan. And there are very simple, local, tailor-made options that people that the governments are implementing at the ground level. For example, raising public awareness that has worked tremendous throughout this summer. We started working on Ahmedabad. I mean, the first plan was the Ahmedabad heat action plan in 2013, but after that, several other cities and states and districts in India and even in our neighboring countries implemented their heat action plan, particularly after the 2015 devastating heat wave that had a toll of more than 2,500 deaths in India in the end of May, and lately in Pakistan also in the early June, more than 1,200 people died in Karachi, Pakistan. So those events were eye-opener for the other parts of the countries in India and Pakistan as well. And the national governments, for example, the National Disaster Management Authority, the India Meteorology Department, the National Health Authority departments, they started taking the issue seriously, and the importance of the issue, and started working with their state counterparts, with their state and district agencies, on developing their local heat health adaptation plans and policies and implement that. We have seen impact of public awareness, that has happened throughout these years in India on the health, on the public health, at least in this year. I mean, the officially recorded number of deaths this year in India and Pakistan during the entire summer so far is only 90, which is definitely underreporting. And the underreporting of heat-related morbidities and mortality is not just an issue of India; it's an issue globally, because heat is also something that we call, is difficult to report, because the consequences that happen on health directly because of heat are only 10%, but the rest of the 90% are indirect consequences. For example, those who are already vulnerable, people with comorbidities, people at the extremes of age, the elderly, their existing, conditions, their existing comorbidities or health conditions do deteriorate even when they are indoors and they are not exerting or exposing themselves outside in the sun. So we don't know the burden exactly, but yes, what we didn't see during this summer, which was almost entire summer we spent in heat waves. There was no week when we didn't have alerts in different parts of the country for heat waves. But the good part was that we didn't see the rushes to the hospitals. We didn't see the rushes to the emergency room, or the ambulances running around the cities for heat health emergencies. Partly this could be credited to the efforts that the national and the state agencies have put in raising the public awareness and building the capacities of their health system and other key stakeholders in addressing the issues of heat health. But what this particular heat, summer season has also taught us or flagged is the importance of other sectors of the economy to work on heat health. It's not just the health that has to, that gets impacted directly because of the extreme heat, but it's also the other sectors of the economy. For example, agriculture, we saw impact of heat waves on the wheat, crop. We saw the impact of heat. We are also seeing the impact of heat on the power, the energy sector, in terms of coal shortages and power cuts in some regions. So it's not just the responsibility of the health sector, but it's the responsibility of all, and all of these sectors of the economy will have to work on their own heat action plans in the future and come up with their own strategies to address the issue comprehensively. Yeah.
Thank you. I think the intersection that's needed between different ministries, between different specialists coming together, because these issues of climate change and global warming are so pervasive, they can't just be left up to environment ministries to handle all of it. It has to be handled by everyone collectively. But it's great to hear that adaptation efforts are working. And your point that I'll just re-raise here, because it is so important that in the climate change community, so much more finance has gone toward mitigation efforts than adaptation, and the need to switch that and to start giving more finance to adaptation methods, because they do work, as we've seen in India, is just so important. So I just wanted to highlight that. So we only have 5 more minutes, which I wish we could go longer. This is such a rich conversation. So I'll just pose one final question to each of you, and if you could keep your answers to just a couple minutes, that would be great, so we can end on time here. But Alexandra, regarding your novel, Something New Under the Sun, who is your intended audience for this novel, and what do you hope this work of fiction changes in their lives, in their minds, and their behaviors?
It's a great question, and it's a question I've thought about a lot. You don't get to choose your audience always for a book, and it depends on who picks it up. But I both wanted to provide a space for people who are feeling climate-related anxiety, climate grief, environmental grief, to see some of their feelings reflected in one of my characters who goes to join an eco-commune. But most of all, I wanted to reach people who aren't planning to think about climate change on that particular day, who aren't necessarily expecting to find it in a book, and to help do some work at breaking down compartmentalization that we often carry through our everyday lives. We tend to think that climate change is a big problem that we'll think about when we think about big problems in a privileged country such as ours, where enough resources are available to shield us from a lot of the most immediate effects. But to weave it into the everyday, to see how every action that we take connects up to this larger problem, and to make the presence of climate change feel really palpable, I think is one of the most central ways in which I wanted to rewrite the reader's experience, their lives.
Thanks a lot. And I think you do accomplish that, just making this huge, pervasive issue that is hard to grapple with, and it is hard to wrap your head around it. But to put it directly into your characters' lives, to show how society has come up with tricks and different mechanisms to deal with this disaster, because that is what's going to lie ahead for us. And Abhiyant, for your last question, also looking at the narrative of global warming, global heating, and how India, which is also portrayed in the media as one of the countries suffering most from this issue so far, is there anything that you would hope to change about the narrative of India at this moment in regards to global warming and climate change?
Yeah, I mean, and this was also, the point that was highlighted by our Union Minister of Environment in the ongoing, I think today itself, in the ongoing, Stockholm 50 conference. So basically, India is already achieving, or let's say overachieving what they have committed in the field of renewable energies to address the issue of greenhouse gases. For example, we committed to achieve 175 gigawatts from renewable energy, and we have already, out of which we have already achieved 150 gigawatts. India plans to phase out, phase down coal, but not phase out coal. And for that, for phasing out the coal, India definitely requires this coal. And in fact, India is upholding the voice of developing countries in that sense, in getting the support from the global north to the developing countries for supporting their climate policies and climate intervention in terms of both expertise and financing. It's still not the climate change or the climate disasters are still not the political agendas in the local elections in India, except in the regions which are vulnerable to climate related disasters. For example, our coastal regions or parts of Northeast, or for example, Delhi pollution, which remains an issue almost every time. But otherwise, it is not an issue. But by and large, the people of India seems to have faith in the current government, in their geopolitical policies, including the ones on the climate change and environment at the global scale. But yeah, I mean, we need to, not just India, but the entire world need to pace up their actions. We have no time left now to address this issue. Like the time is gone. Like if we'll act now, or there won't be any chance tomorrow. I think, yeah.
Thank you. I think that's a really nice note to end on as well. I know Alexandra needs to go, so we'll wrap up here. But thank you both so much for joining. Such different but intersecting insights from both of you, and I really appreciate the work that both of you are doing, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us here today. And to everyone who tuned in on your Friday and made space for this in your day, thank you so much. And we will see you all next time on GLF Live, and enjoy Environment Day on Sunday. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.